U.S. forces surge toward the Korean Peninsula, and Pyongyang, Kim Jong Un watches, his dynasty's grip slipping away. Artillery thunders, shells rip the sky, and Pyongyang braces for destruction. Cornered, Kim faces one terrifying choice: fight back or unleash devastation on the West. Could America stop him before the world burns? Or would this spiral into another endless war of attrition? On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we uncover how the U.S. might invade North Korea. Kim Jong Un has ruled North Korea with an iron fist, continuing his family's tradition. But now he's making moves never before seen. The spark for war would come from an action that shifts the status quo, something that the U.S. can't accept. Maybe he gets his hands on long-range nuclear missiles able to strike the continental U.S., or perhaps it's underwater drones, like Russia's Poseidon, threatening U.S. naval surveillance, undersea cable networks, even coastal cities. That would be a red line for America. Say U.S. intelligence reveals that Kim is preparing a massive strike against South Korea, Japan, or even American forces in the Pacific, like Guam. Washington decides it's time for action. The U.S. would waste no time preparing for war. A set of limited strikes, air and sea-launched missiles, could be launched far faster and far cheaper than a full-scale invasion. But in war, nothing is straightforward. U.S. strategic planners would need to account for as many potential outcomes as possible. There are 5 main areas where preparations would be made, and secrecy matters. The more covert the planning, the higher the chances of success. The U.S. would avoid tipping Kim off at all costs, but the risks remain. The worst-case scenario could kill millions in South Korea and possibly even Japan or the U.S. But if Kim got wind of a major operation against him, he might decide to strike first. The U.S. would coordinate with its allies in the region, South Korea and Japan. Both nations would be in the crosshairs of any North Korean retaliation, and South Korea's military would be guaranteed to be involved in the attack. Japan would, at a minimum, need to be placed on high alert. Its forces could be used as part of a ground invasion. The U.S., South Korea, and Japan would need to coordinate every move, both offensive and defensive. Luckily, most of this planning could be done in secret, away from Kim's eyes. At the same time, there would be another mission running quietly in the background: diplomacy. Washington would be working overtime to keep China and Russia on the sidelines, making sure they didn't jump in and turn a dangerous situation into a global disaster. China and North Korea have technically been bound by a defense treaty since 1961, and it was renewed as recently as 2021. On paper, their ties are often called blood cemented, but actual military cooperation has been almost non-existent for years. What Pyongyang really leans on Beijing for is trade. Almost 98% of North Korea's trade in 2023 ran through China, but that dependence doesn't translate into real defense coordination. Some analysts think that China might back North Korea or just stay out of the fight altogether, but others say Beijing could actually change sides and go against Pyongyang. The main reason for this would be to stop Kim from deploying any of his nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons. China is too close for comfort to both South and North Korea and could be hit by the fallout. China also isn't exactly keen to get dragged into a war with the U.S. and its allies. And the last thing Beijing wants is the global economic chaos a North Korean strike would almost certainly unleash. A war on the Korean Peninsula would trigger a massive humanitarian disaster, with hundreds of thousands of refugees flooding into China, and Beijing has no interest in suddenly sharing a border with a U.S.-aligned state, the likely outcome of an American victory. So whether China sides with or against North Korea, its goal would be the same: to secure its frontier, either with a buffer zone or a friendly China-aligned regime in Pyongyang. For the U.S., China's involvement on either side would complicate things, so there is plenty of room for negotiations between the U.S. and China before any U.S. attack. Depending on the actual plans, China might decide that staying out of the conflict is the best option, particularly if its border security concerns are addressed. Russia, on the other hand, might be trickier to convince. In June 2024, Russia and North Korea signed a new strategic partnership, complete with a mutual defense pact, and Pyongyang wasted no time showing loyalty. It sent 10,000 troops to help Moscow fight in the Kursk region during the 2023-2024 Ukrainian incursion. On top of that, North Korea shipped millions of artillery shells and weapon systems to Russia's front lines. Then, in June 2025, reports said it was sending another 5,000 military construction workers and 1,000 sappers for logistics and mine clearing. So, if the U.S. attacked North Korea, Moscow would be under heavy pressure to step in, and not just from Pyongyang. Russia's credibility as a partner would be on the line, with the whole world watching. What that support might look like is anyone's guess. It could be as minor as shipping weapons or air defenses, or Russian boots on the ground. The nightmare scenario would be a direct clash between the two nations with the largest nuclear arsenals on Earth. Washington could dangle incentives like sanctions relief or expanded trade if Russia and China stayed out of the fight, or the US could threaten major consequences. For Russia, that might mean ramping up support for Ukraine. With battles raging on multiple borders, Moscow might realize its overstretched military simply cannot handle another war. Another key piece of negotiation with China and Russia would be intelligence. Washington would have to make sure neither country leaked the details about the military buildup ahead of the attack. This would form the third pillar of America's preparations. North Korea has one surveillance satellite in orbit, the Jong Un. Western experts say the satellite is operational. This would give North Korea at least some ability to track U.S. military moves, but they remain doubtful about its quality or range. This is an area where the U.S. and its allies have a massive advantage over the North. In April 2025, South Korea launched its fourth homegrown spy satellite, hitching a ride into orbit on the SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. Japan, meanwhile, runs its own fleet under the Information Gathering Satellite Program, and the U.S. has the Space Surveillance Network, or SSN, more than 24 radar and optical sites scanning the skies worldwide. Any military buildup by the North would quickly be spotted by the U.S. and its allies. The North, however, just doesn't have the capacity to do the same. But China and Russia do. China runs a signals intelligence satellite in geostationary orbit, keeping tabs on the U.S. and Indian naval activity. Russia has its own Luch or Olymp inspector satellites, also believed to be used for spying. On top of that, China's Beidou system now boasts 35 satellites providing encrypted military services, while Russia's GLONASS backs its strategic forces. Since 2014, the two nations have been teaming up on space intelligence, and the partnership has only grown tighter. Their networks would definitely spot a U.S. buildup in the area and share the intel with Kim. Even worse, both are thought to have the power to attack or disable America's satellite network, a move that could cripple U.S. operations not just in Korea, but around the globe. But the fourth part of Washington's plans would be impossible to conceal: evacuation plans for civilians. South Korea's capital, Seoul, has a population of just under 10 million people. The entire metro area has over 25 million. That's almost half of the country's population packed into one region. The city sits just 55 miles from the DMZ, and by air, the distance is even shorter. Any U.S. strike on North Korea would almost certainly trigger a devastating retaliation on Seoul. North Korea has an estimated 8,600 towed and self-propelled artillery pieces in service. Approximately 6,000 of those are within range of major South Korean population centers, particularly Seoul. In 2018, the Congressional Research Service estimated that Kim could hammer the South Korean capital with 10,000 rockets per minute. A barrage of that size could kill more than 300,000 South Koreans in the opening days of the conflict, and that is without using a single nuclear, chemical, or biological weapon. North Korea is believed to have around 60 nuclear warheads, plus a wide range of ballistic and cruise missiles to carry them. The big question is, when would Kim actually use them? The assumption used to be that the nukes would be a last-ditch weapon, an act of desperation. But some experts now think differently. If defeat looks inevitable, Kim might gamble on using them early. Kim is thought to have between 2,500 and 5,000 tons of nerve agents like sarin, poisons that paralyze and kill. With thousands of artillery pieces already aimed at Seoul, he could cover the city in chemical death. Back in 2017, military historian Reed Kirby warned that a sustained sarin strike might kill 2.5 million people and injure nearly 7 million more. It would be mass murder on a scale rarely seen in human history. Kim also has large stockpiles of VX, an even deadlier nerve agent. It's the same poison used in 2017 to kill his half-brother, Kim Jong-nam, as he walked through a Malaysian airport. The Pentagon believes that U.S. airbases in and around South Korea would be prime targets for chemical strikes. Officers aren't too worried about the troops themselves. They've got masks and protective gear. But VX attacks could spread panic across the bases and seriously disrupt America's ability to launch air raids. Now imagine the chaos as 25 million people try to flee Seoul, even without millions suffering from the effects of chemical agents. Millions of civilians fleeing Seoul southward would clog up rail lines, air traffic, and roads, at the same time as U.S. and coalition forces were pushing north. That's why civilian evacuation would be such an important part of the U.S.'s preparations. That's why any moves, building shelters or handing out gas masks, would have to be done quietly. The US and South Korea couldn't risk tipping Kim off that something big was about to happen. And when the shooting starts, the first goal of the US would be protection rather than conquest. The US would attempt to take the long-range artillery and rocket batteries that can hit Seoul. They would crater runways to ground Kim's air force, blow up key rail and road links, and try to shoot down missiles before they even left the coast. And according to O-Plan 5015, the US-South Korean war plan, Washington would launch decapitation strikes aiming to kill senior commanders, top officials, and even Kim himself. A swarm of aircraft across the Pacific would descend on the region. Every surveillance asset would be thrown into the fight: cyber tools, satellites, drones, and manned AWACS. The opening blows would come from missiles launched from land, sea, and air. Every available US aircraft carrier would likely surge into the fight, and if North Korea managed to knock out land-based airfields, those carriers would instantly become the center of the war. Tomahawk missiles would be launched from US and Allied submarines and warships. F-35 Lightning IIs, F-22 Raptors, and B-2 bombers would pummel North Korean positions. Ground-based missiles would be fired from bases in South Korea, Japan, Guam, and beyond. Warships and fighter jets would rush to wipe out North Korea's navy before it could even leave port, hunting down every ship and submarine already at sea. Meanwhile, south of the border, humanitarian corridors and mobile field hospitals would spring to life while the invasion force is being readied. Estimates vary on how big of an invasion force would be needed to topple Kim. A straight charge across the DMZ would mean heavy casualties. It's packed with heavy defenses, so the likeliest route would be amphibious landings from the sea. The Marine Corps estimates a successful amphibious assault would need between 10,000 and 17,000 troops, with only 5,000 actually hitting the beaches and fighting. The US already stations around 30,000 troops in South Korea, alongside about 600,000 South Korean active-duty personnel. And across the Pacific, US Marine Corps forces total roughly 84,000 Marines and sailors, about 25,000 of them based in Okinawa, Japan. The US already has the troops, but not all the ships. Moving them would tie up at least 20 of the Navy's 31 amphibious ships, and that would take weeks to assemble. Roughly half the transports would have to sail in from the US. If the opening bombardment was successful, invading units would rush to capture WMD sites and command and control hubs, denying Pyongyang the means to strike back. If it fails, the operation would quickly demand a far larger ground force. A 2016 South Korean white paper said the US would need nearly 700,000 ground troops and about 2,000 warplanes to fight in Korea. Analyst Bruce Bennett thinks the real number is closer to 200,000 troops. Either way, that is far more than what's already in the region. A ground push would probably be led by South Korean forces with US support. If the attack looks like South Korea's, not America's, Beijing and Moscow might be easier to keep on the sidelines. Coalition forces would face brutal terrain, minefields, rivers, and rugged mountains that favor defense and ambush. Progress would depend on breaching lines, securing crossings, and isolating garrisons, not a mad dash for the capital. The aim wouldn't be to win fast so much as stop missile launches, end artillery bombardments on civilians, and make enemy units collapse before street-to-street fighting. The quicker North Korea's offensive punch is neutralized, the less damage South Korea will take. It's hard to predict how the initial exchanges might unfold. North Korea has over 1.2 million active servicemen, a huge obstacle even for the US. If Washington maintains the element of surprise, quietly assembles forces, persuades China and Russia to stay out, and smashes most primary targets early, the war could end fast. If not, it would be a long, bloody slog. But if Kim can get some early shots off on his own, or launches a counter-invasion, all bets are off. The conflict is high risk. There's a possibility that it runs into a long, grinding, hugely bloody war that causes mayhem economically around the globe. But even in the event of a quick victory for the US coalition, the real challenge is likely to emerge only after the shooting stops. Combined casualty estimates range between hundreds of thousands and millions depending on the types of weapons used and the length of the conflict. A massive humanitarian disaster in the north is probably inevitable, and a huge refugee flood toward Russia and China would follow. The invading force would have to secure WMD stockpiles and arms depots, feed and shelter millions, clear minefields, keep power and water running, and stop insurgencies. And then the long-term problems would surface, and they might be the hardest part. The Kim family has ruled North Korea for 3 generations. Most of the population has been brainwashed from birth into believing that the Kim dynasty is like gods. Who will rule over them after the Kim regime is deposed? And how will the US get the population to accept the new regime? The diplomatic, political, and economic fallout for the US and for the global economy and security order would be massive and unpredictable. It's almost unthinkable the US would lose any war with North Korea, but victory could still come at a far higher cost than leaving a dangerous status quo alone. That's why Washington has avoided a full-scale invasion so far, and why most analysts urge extreme caution. We've looked at how the US might invade North Korea, but what if Pyongyang struck first? Watch What If North Korea Launched a Nuclear Bomb Minute by Minute to see how the world would react, or click on this video instead.